And there's the first glitch.
We told you.
Ah, here we go.
It's time for the Sal and Rich and roving reporter Larry Show. Today we have a great show. Our very special guest is Tom Tursich. You may have heard about Tom. He's the young man who decided to take a long walk back in 2015. And walk he did. Tom walked for 7 years, 28,000 miles, traveled through 38 countries, and crossed every continent except Australia because of lockdown, with his dog, Savannah. It's going to be a very interesting show.
That's another long
He's
story,
not with
Tom.
us. He's roving.
Yeah, he's roving.
He's
So
roving
welcome
right
aboard.
now. So let's
Welcome
open this
aboard.
up. We are excited to have you here. Yep. And the first time I met you, I'm not sure if you remember, you were a server in Indy Blue.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that was about what year?
That would have been, I guess, 2014.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
2014. Yeah.
And I was with my wife and my nephew and niece. You were the server, and all of a sudden you told us, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to go walk around the world." And we just looked at you, and you told us the whole story, and we were fascinated by it. And I came home. I told my daughter, who's married to Alex Marrow, and she says, "Oh yeah, I know all about this, yada yada yada." And it was just amazing to watch you for the next, I guess, 10 years, right?
7 years.
7 years,
It's
yeah.
been 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just amazing, and you got us through COVID, man, with your social media, and everybody I know on our street and people over Haddon Township, you were the constant subject of the world walker. Where is he today? Where is he? Where is he? And I know friends of mine used to check in with your parents all the time. We haven't heard from him. What's he doing? So why don't we kick it off with, why did you do it?
Yeah. So I had a friend who passed away when I was 17. She was 16, Anne Marie. We grew up a block apart from each other. We were good childhood friends, went to Strawbridge Elementary, walked to school together. In high school, her friends were my friends. And when she died in this freak jet ski accident, it really drove home the fact that, if it could happen to Anne Marie, then it could happen to me. And of course, I had thought about death intellectually before, and when I was a kid, I remember having all these sleepless nights trying to resolve death and trying to imagine what it would be like to die, and then coming to no answer, and then sort of setting it aside and forgetting it and going about my life. And then when Anne Marie passed, it brought all of that angst and all those unresolved questions back, and really forced me to figure out how to integrate the fact that I was going to die and it could happen at any moment. And then a couple months later, someone played Dead Poet Society in a class, in a speech and communications class, and that provided a lot of the answers that I needed. Carpe diem, seize the
Right.
day, all that stuff. And then I thought about, okay, I have this limited amount of time here. What do I want out of life? And when I really thought about it, I wanted to travel. I wanted to be forced into adventure. Forced because I knew that I was timid and introverted, and I really wanted to be pushed to grow. And I wanted to understand the world. And I was looking for all these different ways to, make that happen. And then I stumbled across these two guys, Steve Newman and Carl Bushby, these two guys who had walked around the world. And once I saw that, it was like the light went off and said, that fits everything that I value. That fits everything I wanted out of life. And then it was 8 years of saving, working at Indy Blue for about a year. But saving, working, living at home, paying off loans until I was able to begin.
So about how old were you when you left?
I was just about 26. It was the day before I turned 26 when I left. And so I remember I was working a solar panels. I had been installing solar panels since I was 17, basically every summer. And then after college, I would do that. I was doing that full time. And before I turned 25, I was working with all these older guys and they were all really beat up, their bodies. And most of them were ex-iron workers, but they're all really beat up.
You don't have to rub that in.
And they'd be working these long days, and then you go back and you sit at the hotel and you watch some TV and drink some natty ice or whatever it was. And I was like, I love the work and I love these guys, but I can't, like, I had to draw the line somewhere. It's like, I can't do this forever. So I said, I'm going to quit at 25. So I quit at 25, even though it was a very good, very well paying job. And then I started working at Indie Blue, the Indian restaurant, and then I was working at El Sitio. I think it's closed now. It's a Peruvian, like South American restaurant. So I was working that, and I was working at an insurance firm. I was working sometimes I was working 3 jobs at a time, just to save money. And then at that point, I told myself, okay, the day I'm leaving before I turn 26. That's the plan. And so then I left the day before I turned 26.
So when you
And
say
what day was that?
April 2nd.
April 2nd.
So when you
That's out.
made the point of I'm going to do this, what kind of preparation did you have to do? I mean, because you just don't start walking.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like a crazy amount. You can really only plan so much in your head. I mean, I did research into the visas that are needed and the general route, and that was determined a lot by how easy it is for an American to get a visa. But then otherwise, I've been an athlete my whole life, so I figured, okay, like, I'll figure out the physical side of things sooner or later. I went on some hikes. I did 10-day hike. I did some 2-3 day hikes. And then eventually I knew I didn't want to carry a backpack. I hated carrying a backpack. And also it didn't seem practical because you just wouldn't be able to carry enough food and water.
Right.
But it's also just like walking around with a 70-pound tumor. I would be a cripple if I carried around a backpack for 7 years. So I got this bike stroller, or this it's like a bike stroller basically to attach to the back of a bike, let a kid ride in the back. And I thought, okay, I'm going to attach this to my waist and I'll just pull all my things around in it. And so I took that to the factory in Collingswood, this maker space, and looking for someone to sort of modify this aluminum arm. And that's when I met Tom Marchetti, who's another Haddon Townshipite, very good friends with the Marrows, grew up with the Marrows, who kind of connects us all. And he was like, he kind of right away believed in my story. And at that point, I had barely told anyone. I told people maybe in high school, and I told a few people in college that I was planning on walking around the world. But generally, I didn't like talking about it because it's like an insane idea. And, why would I talk about this crazy idea when I haven't started it? It just seems very arrogant. But I told Tom about it, this is what I'm planning on doing with it. And so he took it right away, and we walked around the factory. He was trying to get me sponsors. He set up some press conferences, ultimately got me my primary sponsor, Philadelphia Sign, and really helped me start selling myself a little bit, or talking about it even at all. And so that's kind of that was like the primary preparation, was just trying to save money, pay off loans, and then figure out some way to carry my things. And eventually Tom made me this big cart, and I pushed around all my things in it. And then the first month or so of walking, like the physical aspect, it was really difficult going. I was cramping all the time. I lost so many toenails and I had so many blisters, and the first month was not easy. Even though I was like a tennis player in college and had been going to the gym, walking for 8 hours or 6 hours, whatever it was that day, was very different than anything else I had done, and my body was not ready for it. And that's like the other difficult thing in the very beginning, that first month, even that first week, was just figuring out where to walk. I remember I went into Pennsylvania. I had these bike maps that I was going to follow all the way down to Florida, and I get onto these windy Pennsylvanian roads, and I almost died like 6 times because cars are whipping around these narrow little roads.
Oh,
And I threw
jeez.
those maps out, and then I got to figure out something else. Yeah.
This is not safe. Wow. So
No, no.
when
It's,
you
I mean, if you know Pennsylvania too, those roads are
I do.
harrowing.
Yep, yep. I lived in Valley Forge for a
Yeah,
little bit, and so yeah, I know the area really well. And you're right. You
yeah.
can. I'd ride my bike on
Right
some of
around
these
there.
roads.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy. So, so you mapped it
Yeah.
out, right? And so you think about the Appalachian Trail at all, or just totally avoided that and decided to go across? Did you go east to west or north to south?
No, I did think about the Appalachian Trail, but again, I was going to pull this cart, and so that kind of took away the trails right away.
Okay.
The trail was out of the question because just pulling the cart on it would have been such a pain. So I walked that first year. I walked New Jersey down to Mexico, the kind of the east of Mexico. I entered through Reynosa or McAllen in Texas, and then I passed through Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. So that was the first year. And yeah, it was.
When did you get Savannah,
I
his
got
dog?
Savannah after 4 months of walking in the US. I adopted her in Austin, Texas. And so I'd spent those first 4 months on my own, never really imagining getting a dog. And it, but over, I mean, one of the challenging things about that initial section and why I'm very glad I started in the US is was just figuring out where to sleep each night and how to sleep in places each night. And in the beginning, I would get discovered all the time. I would camp in these, places that would be, uh, like I remember just a few days in, I camped basically in the center of like these 8 houses in this little patch of woods, and I'm just kind of surrounded by these 8 houses. And then another night, I was in this other patch of woods, kind of by this high school, and kids saw me on their way home. Another time, I camped on someone's property because I couldn't find somewhere to sleep before it got dark, and I was like, "Oh, here's some woods. I'll just sleep in there." And then when I woke up, there's a woman and the police officer yelling at me. I had no idea I was on their land. So that was like
God.
a difficult thing in the beginning. And then the other difficult part of it is that there's always this part of your brain when you're camping when you're sleeping in a new place that you just can't really turn off. I think, and at this point I could, but in the beginning, it's really, it's really a difficult thing is that you're just going to wake up probably 4 times a night, like minimum thinking you hear something. And so you
Hmm.
never really sleep super, super great. You can sleep maybe like 85% of, say, your best sleep, but you're going to wake up a certain amount of times. And so after so many of those nights, I just kept thinking, man, I really want to turn off that part of my brain. And the thing I thought that would do that would be a dog that could listen while I slept. And so when I got to Austin, Texas, I actually didn't walk to Austin. I walked to Houston. I had cousins in Austin. And I said, I'm going to take a week off and just hang out with my cousins there. So they picked me up in Houston. I was in Austin that first day. I had nothing to do. My cousin is at work and her husband's working on his PhD. So I'm just going to walk over to this adoption center. And I walked over there. I spent like 2 hours there trying meeting some of the dogs. None of them really fit. I'm just about to leave when they brought out Savannah and her sister, who are just little puppies that they found on the side of the highway. And kind of right away, I was like, I, actually, I initially walked away. I mean, I was very intrigued. I wanted to adopt Savannah. Her name was Lulu at the time. But I was like, this seems like so rash. I can't just adopt a dog. Like my first day in Austin, I just showed up to this adoption center. I can't just adopt a dog right away. I should sit on this for a second. And this other woman was looking at her and her sister with me, and she said, if you leave, they're going to be gone. They're going to be gone in,
Hmm.
10 minutes. The puppies never last. And so I said, all right. So, that was it. She kind of forced my hand. And so I adopted Savannah there. And as I was adopting Savannah, her sister was being adopted. So they truly lasted like maybe 5 minutes in the adoption
Wow.
center, and then they were gone.
So
Uh,
this
so I got
this,
very lucky
this
that way.
dog gets adopted, thinks it's going to go home to a nice, comfortable house,
Yeah, that's
sleep
right.
in a bed every night, and what happens?
And what happened? And she's living maybe the dog's dream. Gets to go on a walk all the time with her best bud.
Let's go back to the sleeping part and choosing a place to go sleep every night.
Hmm.
So how often did you have an incident where the police or I mean, you mentioned you sat in the middle. The first night you sat in slept in a patch of homes or 8 homes around you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody say anything to you?
Well, that night it was actually I actually met this great family. They saw me. I left a note in their door because I was basically camping behind their house, and I was like, "Hey, I'm here. I'm not a serial killer. I'm gonna be gone in the morning." And the guy came out in the morning. The son like waved over to me. He was smoking a joint and was like, "Do you want to hit this joint?" I said, "No, it's okay." But and then he said, "Do you want to come in for breakfast?" So I went in and had breakfast with the family, and they're all very nice. And so, majority of the time, that's kind of how it went. If I had some encounter with someone who's generally very nice and nothing. I mean, all through Mexico, El Salvador, down in Ecuador, or whatever. There were times I would have to camp on someone's land. I just couldn't find somewhere to sleep, and I'd camp on the edge of some, big property of, generally like farmland, something like that. And every once in a while, a farmer or a shepherd or whatever would find me, and they were always really nice and didn't care. Once I explained what I was doing, and that was everywhere. In Turkey, I was found in Turkey like by the end of the walk. Turkey was I guess 6 years in, basically. I had been walking for so long at that point that I could really sleep anywhere and I knew nothing was going to happen. I had camped in so many places, in so many situations that I knew people were nice and really they didn't care. And
Yeah.
even if probably the people who did care were probably more afraid of me than I was of them, just they're walking around in the middle of nowhere at night and they see this tent and maybe Savannah starts barking or something like that. That's probably going to scare most people off. Um, so let's say, so like in Turkey, I got so lazy about where I would camp. I would just camp like, I was like, all right, this is fine. I'll just sleep here. And then, a shepherd would stumble across me and he'd be very nice and he'd have some dogs that were very nice and it would all be fine and didn't really matter. But in the beginning, yeah, it was, um, I would get myself, I would say, into, um, more stressful situations at night just because I didn't know like the tricks. I didn't know what I could get away with, what I couldn't get away with. And that's something that I just had to work on. I started sleeping in churches a lot by like the time I got to the American South. Like churches I relied on a lot. I would just camp by a church because say the pastor comes out and says, "What are you doing here?" I'd say, "Well, I thought this was a house of God and I would be welcomed here and I'm just looking for a place to sleep outside for a night." And, and generally, I mean, that bore out every time and I never had a
That's great.
problem. And then I got very good at knowing kind of what little patch of woods I could sleep in and get away with. I mean, obviously it'd be great to just sleep in a peaceful, big, massive forest every night. Sometimes that's not going to happen. And so I realized, okay, especially in the US, like no one goes outside at night. Out like if you're out at night, like everyone's inside watching TV. Or
Right.
they're in a bar or whatever. Like I could sleep right next to a road in the US in a patch of woods that's like, 8 foot by 10 foot, whatever. I would never get discovered. No one's going in there. And if someone did find me, they probably thought, think I'm a serial killer or something. They'd be very afraid. In other countries, it's different. Say, like when I was in Morocco, there's people out all the time. I mean, until midnight or later, and they'd be up very early for the morning prayers. And so I'd really have to like tuck away if I didn't want to be seen that night.
Right.
So like, there's all this just these little quirks. You learn all these little tricks, and then you kind of learn the feeling of every country, how dense it is, how many people are there, how late do people stay out at night, how suspicious are people in this country, how protective are they of their private property. So there's a bunch of little things that like you just that I learned to feel. And as I went through more countries, I got really good. I could spend like a night or two in a country and be like, okay, I know exactly what I can get away with and where to look for to camp and how long I need to give myself before sundown to find a place.
Yeah.
So,
Tom, did you ever?
when
Go
you were
ahead, Rich.
traveling through the United States, did you avoid major cities or basically suburbia, back roads?
I would say in general, I try to avoid cities. I mean, everywhere, just because it's really stressful to walk through cities, especially Central and South America, just very busy, a little bit more chaotic cities than say Europe or even North Africa or in the U.S. But also then it's just difficult to find a place to sleep, and so I try and time my day where it's like, okay, if it's a big city, I'm gonna walk through the city all day, and I'll be on the other side of it by the end of the day, find somewhere to camp. If it was too big for that, then it just have to get a hotel or Airbnb, something like that. I wasn't gonna sleep on a bench or something; it'd be too dangerous.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tom, did you ever
Sal,
feel,
you were going to ask something there?
yeah, when you got to, like, I think you went to Colombia, did you ever feel threatened, cartel, drugs, all that? Because you always hear stories about that.
Colombia is interesting because they had this long history of political violence and cartel violence called La Violencia. It lasted probably like 50 years. And so when I was walking it, I had just walked through Central America, which statistically was the most dangerous section of the world. You had El Salvador and Honduras were one and two most violent countries in the world, and then every country but Costa Rica was, I think, top 15. And so Colombia was like a little bit of a reprieve. I think at the time it was in the top 20 still, but it felt like, okay, I'd gotten through the worst of it. And even then, I mean, it's like, I guess I'll get into that later, but even that is not like, the world is very safe. I don't mean to say like these places are like, there's people living there all the time and they're living fine. And I don't want to blow the danger out of proportion because it's not crazy. But Colombia is interesting because this older generation, I would get to these towns, I'd be walking through these mountain towns, and I'd sit down at a restaurant and I would talk to, say, the owner, just, an older guy or an older woman, and they would always warn me, they said, be careful about the town ahead. It's really dangerous in the town ahead, or, the FARC's there or whatever. Be careful about the town ahead. Every older person would say this because that had been their lived experience. And then if I talk to a younger person, they'd be like, "Oh no, it's fine." Like, I mean, they were like, maybe it was dangerous, 10 years, 30 years ago. It's fine now, and that bore out. I mean, Colombia was fantastic. Walked through it, no problem. It was really friendly and wonderful. And I walked through very remote places in Colombia too. Never had a problem. But it was very interesting to see that like lived experience and the difference in how it borne out and how people would always, be careful. The town ahead. You got to be
Right.
careful. That's and every town would say that. I mean, the town ahead. That's the dangerous one. So whatever was
cool.
outside of what they knew.
Yeah.
So now you're in South America, right?
What's that?
You're in South America. You made your way there. About what time frame was that?
So that was, let's see, I got there. It would have been March of 2016. And then, and then I walked it kind of that summer into that winter. And then ultimately caught a boat from the bottom of Argentina in the beginning of March 2017 to Antarctica. And then
Wow.
and then flew up to back home to get Savannah's paperwork to get her into Europe. And then did the Isles, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland. Fell very sick with a bacteria infection from somewhere in South America.
I remember that.
Healed up, and then it was Denmark down to Spain, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, up Italy, and then kind of along the Mediterranean, across Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. So that's the general route, and then back across the U.S.
What was it
So,
like in Antarctica? How cold was
By
it?
this time, yeah.
I'm sorry, Rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
for-
fine. I mean, we're there in summer, I guess. What's that?
Okay. No, I was just like, you think of
Yeah.
Antarctica as like it's cold, but I guess the summertime it gets to reasonable temperatures.
Yeah, it was like 30, 31, and you have nice gear, and you're on a boat, so it works out.
Okay. All
Wow.
right. Go ahead, Rich.
So then you're in Europe, and well, how did you like South America? I mean, was it?
South America was interesting. I would say for The intensity of Central America was very intense. It was the first time I was walking abroad. It's very densely populated. I was learning a new language as I went. I was learning new cultures, learning how to navigate through all of that. And Savannah was a puppy. So it was like this really intense period of growth and like survival as well, and paranoia. And then by the time I got to South America, it's like, okay, I have a sense of what I'm doing. My Spanish is pretty strong now, so I can get details from people about, wherever it is I'm passing through. So I don't just have to live with like this fear. I can resolve that. And then I walked Colombia and Ecuador, which are just beautiful countries, so picturesque, very calm, and then descended to the Peruvian coast where it's flat. And the Peruvian coast is just all desert. And so then I was walking desert for months in Peru and then into Chile until I crossed the Andes into Argentina. And that was like very, very transformative certain months because I had just nothing to do but think and be bored and really contemplate myself. And so I would say that that period was probably the most, I would say, maybe it's not the most transformative, but I would say internally it taught me the most about myself in a certain way. I remember having this thought in South Peru that I had thought all the thoughts. I had thought everything that my brain could possibly think of. I had thought about, every like how my parents influenced me, these mistakes I made, what I could have done differently, my teacher in second grade, what they said and how that influenced me, how the culture influenced me. I had thought about everything from every different angle so many times that I was just empty. And then on top of that, I'd lay out in the middle of I'd lay out at night on a tarp in the desert because there's no chance of rain, there's no bugs. So I just throw the tarp out and then you'd see the Milky Way and a billion stars every night. And they would just sit on your chest like they were crushing you. And so that was very like purifying and clarifying, and it brought me a lot of peace that I still kind of hold with me today. I don't really have any great internal turmoil, I would say, probably because of my walk along Peru and Chile.
Wow, that's
It's crazy.
and this is interesting because I mean I read your blog every night or your Facebook post whenever. I didn't get that out of it. You just that's really interesting.
you
Go ahead,
probably
Sal.
felt connected to the universe because you're looking at the sky is not getting washed out by the lights from the city or anything like that. So everything is really bright. Probably could feel like you reach out and touch it. I can't imagine what that must be like, but it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely missing it. It's just such a it was such a reminder that you're nothing. Like you're just the most minuscule of minuscule things.
Yeah, yeah,
And in a certain way that's very liberating. In other ways it can be very worrying, depends on your outlook. But yeah, it made me contemplate, what's important in life and what doesn't matter. And the answer I came to when I was deep in the desert and really had no thoughts and felt the stars crushing me was that's just like happiness is the only thing that matters. Like if you like it, because everything else is just a means to try and make people. The reason you get married is because you think it's going to make you happy. The reason you have kids is because you think it's going to, well, that's probably genetics or whatever. The reason you make money, the reason you do anything is just to be happy, be content kind of thing. And when everything is ephemeral, everything is leaving anyway. Anything permanent you create is going to be gone in one way or the other. So it's like, can you be happy? Can you make other people happy? Can you make maybe future generations happy? Because no one's carrying anything with them. And that's the only currency really.
yeah.
And so that's what I came to deep in the deserts, and that's what the stars taught me.
What a
Well,
lesson.
yes. Now, your parents following the whole trip. I assume you had some type of satellite phone or something. How did they handle you being away for so long? Or were they worried? Or
Yeah.
My mom in the beginning was very worried. I mean, she knew better than I was how much of an idiot I was and how naive I was.
great waiter, though. I'll say that.
Very way.
Yes.
That's from my dad. He's very personable, so I got
Okay.
that from him. He's a people person. And my dad had camped. He lived off the land in Hawaii for 5 years. He lived under a tarp, so he was like, "Yeah, go for it." He didn't. He's like, "This is part of it." But my mom was much more worried. I don't think it was until probably like the first year, once she saw I passed through Mexico and Guatemala and like partway down Central America, then she relaxed a little bit. She was like, okay, he knows what he's doing. And she began to trust me a little more. She said she would get freaked out though, still, when she would look on the map and I would like, I started sharing my GPS location with people, and everyone should look at the map and she'd zoom out and see how far away I was, and that would really freak her out. But I'd say like after the first year, she really trusted me and trusted that I knew what I was doing.
So
Great.
you were posting on social media quite a bit. Had South America caught up with who the world walker was?
No, I would say, the only time I was recognized on the walk that wasn't in the US was in Ireland. And I mean, I did have people occasionally reach out to me. Never in South America. My social media presence hadn't grown enough, I don't think, at that point. But I got people in Europe um, saying, offering me a place to stay if I was passing through somewhere. And I actually took a few people up on it. But the only time I was recognized randomly was in Ireland. And, I'm walking and this guy, calls out, I said, Tom. It's like, what the, who, Tom, who knows me here? And so he like ran over and was like, yeah, I follow you. Saw you on Reddit. This thing, it's incredible, whatever. And it was like very jarring to hear your name
Wow.
in some place that you've never been before. But no, for the most part, I was anonymous in these places. And I would say the great thing about traveling, particularly traveling on foot and traveling in this manner, was that it always felt like I was discovering these places. I wasn't going through in Peru. I'm in Lima for a little bit, and maybe I visit Cusco or Machu Picchu, or in Europe, maybe I go to Copenhagen or Barcelona, and I'm in there for a little bit but for the majority of the time when I'm in these countries, is I'm just passing through little towns where no tourist would ever be. So I always have this like sense of discovery. Every town I go to, I'm probably the only tourist there, especially when it was like in Central and South America and then out of Europe too. I was the only tourist there. And in some of these countries, it was like they were just losing, like, what are you doing here? This is incredible. Why are you here in this little town? And that's really, really satisfying. I mean, it brings a lot of I think when people travel, not for everyone, some people just want to go to the beach and lounge on the beach and relax because they're working hard, and that's totally viable and totally reasonable. Um, but for the people who want that sense of discovery, I feel like it can get lost a little bit when when you go to Paris or you go to Rome or wherever it is, and you're surrounded by other tourists, because it doesn't feel like you have that
Right.
sense that you're the only person there and that you're really getting to know a place. And so that I would say was one of the great benefits and one of the great joys of walking.
So you left the Antarctic and you went to
I went up,
England.
yeah, so I flew home. It took a couple months to get Savannah's paperwork to get into Europe. And then we walked Ireland up North Ireland into Scotland. But at this point, I had been having this bacteria infection that I picked up in South America was I didn't know at that time, but it was really slowly worsening. I started with just kind of stomach pains, but by the time I got to Scotland, even in Ireland, I was collapsing a few times a day with stomach spasms. And in Scotland, I noticed when I got there, I was like losing weight and having to cinch my belt, and then I was just exhausted, like I had never been, and so I ended up taking a train to London, where my cousin lives. I spent a month in and out of infectious disease there. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I flew home, infection worsened, in agony all the time, and they just started kind of throwing antibiotics at me until something started working, and I recovered. Once I recovered, picked up the walk in Denmark rather than Scotland, because I was really afraid of the Scottish rain, and it was not an easy country to walk, and I was in not a great state after the recovery, and I was like, all right, I'll start in Denmark, where there's going to be bike paths all the way down Germany or whatever, and it'll just be I'll ease my way back into Europe.
So,
And
what time frame was this? You went back.
let's see. So I picked up, it would have been February or March 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, March 2018, 27. No, I don't know. Sometime in March I
Okay,
picked up
before the pandemic.
before the pandemic. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yep.
So you're in Denmark. You like Denmark?
Yeah, Denmark, and then Denmark, Germany, Belgium, France, Spain. So all Europe, and Europe was, I mean, it was fantastic. It was a great place to be recovering. I definitely picked back up earlier than I would have liked, but my sponsorship with Philadelphia Sign um, was only going when I was walking, and I didn't have any money, and so I was like, I need to start walking again to live. And so I picked up the walk really before I was ready, and it was like a nightmare, honestly, when I started, because it was still a little bit winter, so I was walking through snow, and I love it, obviously. And again, Europe was just so easy to walk. There's bike paths everywhere. There's great bakeries, great food. It's very peaceful. It's very safe. It's beautiful. So it was ideal in that way. But I had just been in agony for like 6 months, basically. And towards the end, there's like 3 months where, I mean, I was sleeping like a couple hours a night. I developed colitis. I was still having these stomach spasms. I mean, it was pure like pain 24 hours a day, unless I was sleeping. And even then, wasn't sleeping much. And so when I picked up the walk in Europe, kind of, I was not in a great shape physically. And then all my thoughts like had this dark bend to them, where normally my optimism would like carry me through. That had been twisted by all that pain I had been in, and I was just in this really negative, really pessimistic state. And when even the smallest thing went wrong, I would just like crumble emotionally. And so it was really difficult. And that whole walk down to San Sebastian, Spain, where I had to stop to get a visa extension, it was just miserable. I mean, I mean, it was such a juxtaposition between how easy the walking was and how beautiful it was versus the mental state I was in. And then
You
it wasn't until I
experienced the
got onto
highs.
the Camino in Spain.
I'm sorry, Tom, but you
What's
experience the
that?
highs and the lows. So when you're in the desert, you're like total nirvana, and then life hits you across the head here, and now you got a challenge, and so you that appears to be the lowest part of your journey, is battling this infection that you had. So it's almost like you had
Yeah, I
a
would
mini
agree.
life
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. And I would say one of the earliest things you learn when if you're doing this sort of traveling, you're walking like this, is that nothing's permanent. I mean, there's times, you're pushing up the mountain and it sucks and this is terrible, but then you're at the mountaintop and then you're going downhill and then you do it again or whatever. Or even in a more simple sense or a different sense, there's like a week, say, where just nothing would happen. and it was so boring. And I'm like, oh my God, like all I'm doing is walking every day and I'm tired and I'm camping in not these great campsites. And then the next week you meet a person, someone interesting every single day, and you have great food every day and you see amazing places every day. And that's just kind of life. Like, it's just,
Yep. Highs and lows.
just sometimes it's, the
Were,
highs
were
and
the campsites more prevalent in Europe and, say, South America, where you could camp every night?
I would say South America was fantastic camping because it's very low population density,
Okay.
and especially in the desert. The desert, I would just walk out wherever, or up in the Andes, just walk wherever, sleep. Whereas Europe, it's so densely populated that it was more difficult to hide away. But at the same time, there are more like campsites, and most of the towns have a little, especially in France, had a little RV area in almost every town where travelers can park and get a hookup. And so camping was fine there too. But I'd stayed in more hotels in Europe out of necessity than probably anywhere else.
How about food? Where was the best food?
Oh, man. A lot of good food. Mexico's definitely up there. Turkey, I would say too. Georgia has great food. Um, yeah, I would say those are probably the top three that I would go with.
What about my
Turkey
home
was
country,
great.
Italy?
Walking.
Italy. What about Italy?
Okay. Yeah, I forgot. Italy. Yeah, come on. Italy's ridiculous. Italy's
Pasta.
just like
Yep.
I've never felt like such a bum in my life as when I got to Italy and my sneakers are torn and like I'm wearing the same clothes every day and the women are walking to work in stilettos and the men are in suits and they're drinking their espressos and yeah, I've never felt like such a bum before.
That's funny. I have another
Yeah.
question,
Gosh.
kind of back to logistics. Obviously, when you're in the desert or you're tromping through South America, there's no Acme nearby. So how did you figure out your provisions? And then, what were you feeding Savannah? Was she eating what you're eating?
Yeah, so the provisions were it, I mean, this is a lot of trial and error again. And again, it's a good thing I started in the US where I had time to kind of figure out what I needed and what how much I needed of things. I relied a lot on peanut butter because it's just a lot of calories and protein and salt and fat has everything in it. It's like perfect traveling food. And then otherwise, there's a lot of dry goods. So granola, we get it, nuts, dried fruit, all that, pasta, all those dried goods. And then it becomes about just looking ahead on the map and knowing, okay, this is how long you have until the next town or whatever. And so again, in the deserts, even in Wyoming, say, or in Kansas, you have to be really mindful of that. You have to be
Mm,
thinking about that when you get to town and be very sure, okay, you have enough for 3 days or whatever it is to get to
right.
this town, and then recharge. In other countries, in Europe, in the northeast of the US, you can get away with not carrying any food because you're hitting a town, 3, 4 times a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it depends on the country, and you just whatever the country had, whatever even in little towns in the middle of nowhere, there's people living there. So you just get whatever they're getting, and probably if I'm stopping in town, I would stop at a restaurant and I would eat as big a meal as I could, and I'd probably order a meal to go, carry that with me, have that too, and have a nice meal before I started getting into the same old things I was always eating.
Right.
And then Savannah just she would eat whatever dog food I could get, and I could get dog food pretty much everywhere, which kind of surprised me. I remember even in like this little town in Argentina, which was so removed from everything. They would have all these little towns would have this like big, maybe like 80-pound bag of dog food, and you could just buy a kilogram at a time from it. The only countries that I couldn't find dog food was Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, which are primarily, or they're just Islamic countries, not a lot of dogs.
Right.
And when I went through those, Savannah was eating like sausage and beef pate. So she was probably happier in this country. Who knows?
Happy dog.
This is what I signed on for.
Right.
Not this
Exactly.
walk.
Yeah. This
So
walk is
how long were
crazy.
you in Europe?
Europe was, so it would have been 3 months down from Denmark down to Spain, and then another month and a half through Spain, and then it was up Italy for like 3 months. I took my time in Italy for obvious reasons, and then it was along the Mediterranean, the Adriatic, for another, I guess, 3, 4 months. So it was like a year in Europe, basically.
And
Yeah.
this entire time you're walking through Europe, you're not being challenged by authorities or.
No, I mean, no, the people, so like in Scotland, when I was very sick or getting sick, I remember I was so tired and I came to this bend in the road and there's a bus stop there and it was pouring rain and I just called a night. I like went into this bus stop and it's like fairly remote. It's not totally remote, but it's like this bus stop isn't going to be used, basically, you could tell. And so I just like, this is where I'm sleeping tonight. And so I laid in the bus stop and whatever. And then around midnight, the police were, the police were called and they come over and it was two police officers and they were just like the nicest people ever. They're like, you have your little friend with you? Okay, here's what you're doing. It's like, oh, well, there's a better place to camp, if you walk like a kilometer up the road. And I was like, I'm so tired. It's already raining. It's like, forget it. I'm not gonna do that. I'm like, okay, all right, well, be safe. And they just let me be. So nice. And then the next morning, as I'm walking away, a different police officer came up and was like, hey, I was looking for you. Here you go. And he gave me two like sausage pastries for breakfast.
Oh,
It's
wow.
fantastic. So I would say, I mean, it's actually, maybe I don't want to get into this, but I'm going to anyway. One of the most frustrating things about the US is the how paranoid the police have to be. And I don't want to say like it's, the police officers are put in a very difficult position because just everyone has guns. And so they have to be paranoid.
All right.
But I was stopped more in the US and more aggressively, like by 1,000,000% than anywhere else in the world. I mean, and I
Huh.
was stopped by police all the time in places, just asking for papers, whatever. But they were always really nice, and they didn't come from that place of, fear or mistrust. It was from, I'm a civil servant, and here's the rules, whatever. Here's how can I help
Right.
you? Okay, let's navigate this thing together.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So,
and I remember in Kansas, I was stopped 3 times in a week by the police because someone called the police. They saw the strange man walking through Kansas,
right.
and and two of them were like insanely aggressive and armed to the teeth and patting me down. And then it was just like, man, I miss the days of the police giving me a sausage pastry more.
Yeah.
So you left Europe and you entered the United States in where?
That was in I can't remember. That was 20. Man, when did I finish walk? In 22, right? In 22, I guess.
last summer we.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In 22. So September 22, I came back. Yeah,
And you
then
walked,
and then walked
in
back until
California,
March.
Seattle, or hit the wrong button there, Sal.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Apologize.
You
That
came in
was in,
through Seattle or California, was it, or
yeah, through Seattle. Yep.
Seattle?
Seattle over to Montana, then down Idaho, back into Montana, down Wyoming, Colorado, and then basically across the Great Plains all the way to Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey.
Wow,
Yep.
that's
Amazing journey.
really amazing. Would you do it again?
No.
No.
Why the hell would
No.
I?
It's a great life. No, yeah. And it's it's a great life, but it was very difficult.
Yeah, I
You know,
bet.
it was the best life, but it's very difficult, and I'm very glad.
Did you
There's
ever
snow outside
ever
right now. I'm glad to be inside.
Did you ever
Yeah.
have the hell with this? I'm leaving. I'm going home. Why am I doing this? Am I freaking crazy?
No, it never got to that point. Again,
Never.
this is something I thought about for so long, and I was really careful about, I had the idea at 17. It took me 8 years to to make it happen. So this wasn't some like half-hearted thing where I was like, oh, I'm just, this is what I want to do. It's like, no,
Right.
this was deep into me. This was a part of me. And so as difficult as it got, there was never really a part of me that was gonna throw in the towel.
I would watch as you were coming across the United States. You would post you're in this town, that town, and I would go on Google and look at these towns, and I'm thinking these towns are still open
Yeah.
because they look really deserted.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that. Yeah, yeah, a lot of little towns. Some of those towns had some great diners, some great bakeries.
I remember
I had
that.
great food
Yeah.
across America for sure.
I bet. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Tom, tell us a little bit
what's
about.
next?
Yeah, but before we get to that, I'm sorry, Rich. I made a note about your meeting in Turkey. This guy, Eagle Halderson, I think it was. What was that all about? Because I think that was
Oh yeah,
kind of a
Ayak.
seminal moment
Weirdly, his
for
name
you.
is Ayak.
Aik, okay. It looked like Eagle to me.
Um, yeah, no, it does. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so he's from Iceland, and so that was in. So I was in Turkey. I walked across Turkey along the Black Sea in the north, and then I got to Azerbaijan. COVID hit, everything closed, and I was stuck there for a little bit. And Turkey was one of the few countries that was still open and it was big enough to
because of
walk
COVID.
around because of COVID. So I flew back to Turkey and then I just walked like a loop around this section that I hadn't been before. And I got to Kash, it's a little town on the Mediterranean, and it was very nice. And now at this point, the world is closed. I had nothing else to do. I was just walking back to Istanbul, basically in this big loop. And I was like, hey, no, I'll stay another week. I'll stay another week, whatever. And I ended up. Ayak was one of these guys. He's from Iceland. He was one of these people who was, basically kind of like escaping COVID in a certain way in this little town, or like wintering COVID in a nice place.
Mhm.
And I made all these friends there, and it was like the first time on the walk that I had a community, and Aik was a part of it, and it was really great, and I really needed it like so terribly,
Mm.
but it also really drove home the fact that I was just so over it at that point. I mean, at that point, it was 6 years of walking,
Yeah.
and it was just enough of the contrast of what I didn't have and like the community I didn't have was really pronounced there in Kosh,
Yeah.
and it just drove home that okay, like I think 6 years has been long enough out here.
It's time to go home.
Had you originally planned to hit Africa, or
What's that?
did you ever think about headed down towards Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to have done more of Africa, but I already knew initially I thought the walk would take 5 years, and I had planned it on how easy the visas would be to attain, and so that's how the route was devised.
Okay.
And Africa, I mean, is enormous, and you need visas for a lot of the countries, and it would probably take 3 years, legitimately, probably take 3 years to walk Africa, to down Africa, and
Wow.
already knew even from the beginning. I was like, that's just I'm not going to make this. I'm not going to add that on, and so I'll just do I'll do North Africa, and I'll see the rest of Africa hopefully later in my life, kind of thing. But no, I mean Africa that's an adventure. That's a massive adventure in itself if you're going to walk Africa.
How about Asia?
Right.
China,
Oh,
Vietnam?
would love. I mean, would have loved to. I missed Kazakhstan and Mongolia on my route because of COVID. They were still closed by the time I had crossed Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. And yeah, I mean, every country in Asia was closed basically at that point, and I didn't feel like waiting a year for them to reopen. And and Asia was the reason I chose Kazakhstan and Mongolia to go to is because it would have been easy with the visas. And if I had went further south, I mean, China, you can't get a visa long enough to cross it. And then if you go further south, you need visas for a lot of those countries in the Himalayas. And then in Southeast Asia, it's like, all right, well, this is Kazakhstan, Mongolia. Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia would be the easiest with the visas, but it ended up not mattering because of COVID.
So if you could get on an airplane today and say, I'm going to visit someplace.
I think Japan's
where
on
would
top.
it be? Of
Japan's
all
at
the
the top of
countries
my
you
list.
visited originally
What's
on the
that?
walk, of the
one
countries
that-
that you visited on the walk, I want to take an airplane over and spend a week or two there.
Oh man. I think at this point,
Even Good Morning America didn't ask you that question, right?
that's right. Coming up with the goods. I would probably at this point, I'd probably like back to Europe
Back to
at
Europe.
this
okay.
point. At this point in my life, I think, because yeah, I feel like I've done enough discovering,
Okay.
and I'm satisfied in that way. And when you go to Europe, it's like I just want to bounce from cafe to cafe, and I don't want to hear any cars honking, and I want to go to some museums, eat some good food, and that would be a great vacation for me.
Okay.
So I think that's what it would be. And that's not to say, I mean, like Central South America, amazing places. Turkey, I will be back someday. Georgia, incredible. Uzbekistan is like this undiscovered gem that is just opening to the world and that no one goes to. Kyrgyzstan, maybe the most beautiful country I've ever been to. And those are all, maybe at different points in my life. But I think right now, yeah, it's probably somewhere in Europe.
That's
So
great.
what's next? Any
Yeah,
books
what's
coming
next?
out?
Yeah, so I have a memoir coming out in September is the plan. My editor has it right now, so we're going back and forth on the edits. But it'll be coming out with Skyhorse Publishing in September. And so maybe when you hear this, there will be a pre-order button that you can hit. So editing, working away on that, and then doing a lot of motivational speaking. And so that is how I am paying the bills, is doing these talks. And I really enjoy it. It's something I think before I would have felt like such a fraud getting up there and espousing something. But after walking around the world, it's like, no, there's things I believe in, and there's things that I think are of value to say. And so I'm very much enjoying that. So
That's awesome.
yeah, right now it's speaking and writing, and then just trying to live an easy life.
Yeah, that's the way to go.
That's
An
great.
Easy life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Tom, thank you for doing this. This has been
So I think-
fascinating.
Yep. Yeah. We're
Yeah,
holding you
thank
to
you
the
guys.
hour. We promised you. And
Yeah,
if you want
you
to come
guys are
back and hit us up when the book comes out, you are more than welcome. We'll pay you
Yeah.
the same thing that we paid you today.
Perfect. It sounds fantastic. Thanks for the great interview, guys. It was nice talking with you.
It was
Yeah, it was-
really
it
good
was
talking
great.
with you.
Really, yeah.
Like I said, I was a big fan watching you do this whole thing. And I remember the day you came back into Haddon Township. Everybody was walking with you, and you
Pretty
safely
surreal.
made it out of Philadelphia.
That's right. Yeah. Choose that route wisely.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks.
Yes, indeed.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we're gonna roll out of here with
you, guys.
a song that we thought might be interesting. So, kind of follow the theme here. It's the Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. Walk Like a Man.
Love Frankie Valli.
He's never heard it.
Oh, no, I listen to Frankie all the time.
All right. Thanks, everybody.